So karibu mwalimu Ngũgĩ.
Yeah. Karibu sana. Okay. So hello everyone. Welcome to the session Reading for Care and Solidarity with Professor Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o to express and enhance love and mutual support in this challenging time across space. My name is Mingqing Yuan, a junior fellow at Bayreuth International Graduate School of African Studies. And today we are very privileged to have Professor Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o and Dr. Samuel Ndogo with us. And thank you very much again for making time for this event, and warmest greetings from Bayreuth. Yeah, karibu sana, mwalimu.
So karibu sana, mwalimu Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o. I would like to start by reading and introducing Mwalimu Ngũgĩ with a short biography of Professor Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o. The scholar, public intellectual, and social activist, Professor Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o, is actually one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. Indeed, he is the most prominent, if not most famous, literary author from Kenya. His writing career spanning well over 5 decades. With his extensive over and numerous literary and political essays, Ngũgĩ is one of the Africa's most important writers, and he has frequently been mentioned as a likely recipient for the Nobel Prize for Literature. His proficiency in diverse literary genres has earned him accolades both locally and internationally. We can describe Professor Ngũgĩ as a novelist, dramatist, poet, essayist, editor, social activist, as I've already mentioned, all rolled into one. Ngũgĩ's works capture diverse themes, most notably colonialism, as well as its enduring impact on the colonized people. Professor Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o has published his early novels and short stories in English. Additionally, he has over the years passionately advocated for the use of African languages in writing about the African experience. Setting an example in this endeavor, he has published widely in his Gikuyu language, or Gikuyu mother tongue, especially after his imprisonment in 1978. In Decolonizing the Mind, published in 1986, Ngũgĩ vowed to write his creative arts in African languages, including Swahili, a promise he has tried to fulfill up to date. Since the publication of his first novel, Weep Not Child, published in 1964, Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o has received many prizes of international repute. Some of these prizes include the Jomo Kenyatta Prize for Literature in 1967, the Lotus Prize for Literature in 1973, the Nonino International Prize for Literature in 2001, just to mention a few. Now, last year, Professor Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o was awarded the 2019 Erich Maria Remarque Peace Prize for Decolonizing the Mind, the Politics of Literature in African, the Politics of Language in African Literature. In 1977, Professor Ngũgĩ was arrested and detained without charge for sharply criticizing the inequalities and injustices. Professor Ngũgĩ was a Latin and championing the cause of ordinary Kenyans. In 1982, he was forced into exile, during which he continued to fight for human rights in Kenya, and especially for the release of political prisoners. Professor Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o has been awarded 12 honorary doctorates up to date. I may not have time to read all of them, but to cite one example, in 2014, he was awarded the first ever Big Sir's honorary doctorate of the University of Bayreuth. So Professor has very intimate connections with the University of Bayreuth. I'm glad to note that. Currently, Ngũgĩ is a distinguished professor at the University of California, Irvine. Today, We are very honored to have you, Professor Ngũgĩ, with us at our Digital Literature Festival. Our dear listeners and audience, I want to say that Professor Ngũgĩ will read an extract from his forthcoming epic titled The Perfect Nine, which is scheduled to be published in October this year. The Gikuyu original of that text, titled Kenda Muiyuru, Rugano rwa Gikuyu na Mumbi, was published in Kenya by the East African Educational Publishers in 2018. Please let us warmly welcome Professor Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o for the reading session. Karibu sana, mwalimu.
And so maybe we can also talk about how Ngũgĩ's works has dramatically or drastically changed our life and understanding about African studies and even literature from Africa, and how his influence is so deep and profound that's influenced all our thinkings and ideas. At least for myself, I got to start learning about African literature just because I read his novels, and which I found so many similarities about the life, like what happens in Kenya in history, was also have a lot of similarities with what happened in Chinese history during the colonial time. And that's also one of the inspiration for me to continue to study about his connections and his support for Afro-Asian solidarity. And maybe some Dr. Ndogo can also talk about it.
Indeed, as I've just mentioned, Professor Ngũgĩ is one of the writers I highly admire, and also one of the prominent writers. I started reading his works when I was a young pupil in primary school, in the equivalent of grade 6. And what fascinates me is I actually started reading his works not in English, but the first works that I read by Ngũgĩ were short stories for children that were written in Gikuyu language. And since that time, that was around 1985 or 84, I've followed the writer. I've read, if not all his works, his published works, most of them, including the latest book that we are just about to discuss today. That is The Perfect Nine. That was published in two years ago in 2018, and as I've mentioned in the introduction, it was written again in the Gikuyu original. So I am looking forward to the English translation. And I must say that Ngũgĩ is unique in one sense, that he is proficient in a wide range of literary genres, starting from drama, then all the way to the short story, the novel, as well as poetry. May I also say that he is also not only a creative writer, but he is also a critic, which is quite outstanding because by virtue of being a critic, he is one of the intellectuals or literary scholars who has been at the forefront in engaging, and advancing theoretical frameworks as to how we can approach and study African literature. So I think in that regard, then, I consider Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o as one of the remarkable writers, and his achievements really speak for themselves.
Yeah, I would also like to add, it was also amazing for me to know when I read the book Decolonizing the Mind, that I found my own knowledge structure has been so oriented about Western knowledge since I studied English literature and things like for years, but I don't know anything about literature from Africa or written by African writers, which were not included in the curriculum before. And that's why I think that's also the time that we should really try to look at each other and to see how knowledge is really produced and how we learn about it, and how this kind of learning process should be unlearned, and to shift our focus and attention and for further understanding across continents and across space and time.
Yeah, maybe I can share, because basically also I studied English and German literatures, and Ngũgĩ Thiong'o was one of my very first contacts with encountering African literatures. And it was so amazing to see that because there was this huge idea of decolonizing, and then there was this power of racism and colonial structures all around. So it was like, yes, we have to do it, but how so? And so decolonizing in a manual of how to decolonize, like women. So by then it was a manual of how to colonize. And so this was a perfect like anti-narration to also giving tools. And of course, this famous conference in Makerere about the future of African writing, and should it be written in English, should it be written in French, in Portuguese, because after all, these are no African languages. And in the 60s, that was a very powerful strategy, of course, to fragment them. And I think of Chinua Achebe, you know, who and his writings, and Ngũgĩ does practice that as well. This kind of having English language, but integrate words from Kikuyu, words from Igbo into the English language. So it's like constantly alerting the reader, you know, these characters, they don't speak English, but they speak. And this was also a way of familiarizing yourself as a reader with that context. So that was an amazing strategy that was basically invented by Ngũgĩ and Achebe. And so that was a great reading of mine. And I still remember when the texts were translated into German, they totally erased it. So they had this Igbo words, the Kikuyu words in the English version, but in the German version, they erased it and translated it into German words, which of course, as we know, is sort of a total violation of the narrative aesthetics and strategies, because they were there in order to remind us that white Europe colonized the African continent with the clear aim of erasing African languages. And here we are facing a decolonial strategy being again silenced in German translations. And so far, this is still at work and not really being undone. So, but for me, that was also like, I remember that Shoinka was not a fan of that strategy, because he said African literature that is also written in English because we have appropriated the languages already. So it's our English, it's not theirs anymore. And like he was criticizing the negritude, right? To say, yeah, a tiger does not claim his tigritude. So why should we do that? And there were these two positions in the 60s and 70s. But meanwhile, I feel that the Ngũgĩ's and Achebe's strategies totally got stuck. And whenever we read, we can see these words from African language being integrated into English and French writing, and therefore always reminding us this language shouldn't be here, but it is, but it has become ours, and we know how to appropriate it. So that's something I totally owe to Ngũgĩ.
I would like to share another thing that I found very interesting with his work is that even though his novels and those books were written in 1960s and 70s or 1980s, but even like how many years later now, like almost 40 or 50 years now, we still find these stories are very relevant to our own life and to our own living experience. And I think that's the power. That's a powerful part of it, and why it is so touching.
Oh my God, this is a new world to me. I'm getting an assistant. My grandson, Merengo, he's in San Francisco. He's the one who has been helping me connect. First of all, let me say,
Yeah.
this technology is completely new to me. I live, technology-wise, I live in 20th century, okay?
Yes.
So let me do quick introduction. The section which I'm going to read is from my new book, or epic. The book has already been published in Kenya in Gikuyu language as Kenda Muiyuru, and has been selling quite well for the last 1 year. Now the English version will come out in October this year, a few months from now, by my American publisher, okay? They are both available on Amazon, okay? So you click Amazon, you will find both The Perfect Nine, under which Kenda Muiyuru will be published in English, and in Gikuyu you'll find Kenda Muiyuru, in English, The Perfect Nine. Before I start reading, let me just explain the background. The epic concerns the founding father and mother of Gikuyu people of Kenya, okay? In Kenya, we have many peoples who make up the Kenyan nation. Please note, I'm not using the word tribe. I do not use the word tribe to describe anybody, okay? I talk about Kenya people or Kenya peoples, okay? So Gikuyu people are just a section of Kenyan people, okay? So the story tells the founding, the epic of the founding father and mother of Gikuyu community or Gikuyu people of Kenya, okay? And Gikuyu, that's the father and mother, had 9 daughters, very beautiful daughters. In fact, their beauty was such that it reached all the corners of the continent, okay? But he did not have brothers, only 9 daughters, okay? So since he did not have boys, they had to teach them to do everything for themselves. Use their mind, use their hands, use their body, okay? So they knew how to hunt, climb, run, make weapons, make clothes, you know, and be able to defend themselves. In fact, they were fully formed, okay? They did not have brothers to depend on. So they had to do everything, build houses, everything they did themselves. But now there came a time for marriage, of course, when they got married, but there were no suitors around. But their beauty spread is taken by ostrich flying, and they take it to all the corners of the continent of Africa. And so suitors keep on dreaming about these beautiful black ladies, and each thinks that he is dreaming about the beauty alone, and he sneaks from wherever he is to go in search of that beauty. But on the way, they find that there are many who are dreaming about the same beauty. So 99 of the suitors end up in Mount Kenya region, okay? Or Kenya, below the Mount Kenya, okay? Now, but when they get there, they are 99, and the daughters are 9. Actually, the daughters are actually 10, but we say 9, okay? Perfect 9 means 10, okay? So but there are 99 suitors, and there are only 10 girls, so to speak. So the young people and the girls together, they are sent on a mission to go back to Mount Kenya. And on the way to Mount Kenya, let me explain this one more. Among the 10 perfect beauties, there's one whose legs are very weak, like crippled legs. She's very beautiful every part of the body, but she can't use her legs. So part of the mission they are given as a test of their character is to go and find to find an ogre who has a hair which can cure all diseases, okay? But the hair grows in the middle of the tongue of the man-eating ogre, okay? And to make the task even harder, the ogre is invisible. You cannot tell where he is. He just attacks. He's invisible. And the reason I chose this particular passage to read really was because we are going through an invisible,
okay.
There's a epidemic of this invisible thing which is affecting the whole world. I talked about the invisible foe last year in my book, okay? Yeah. So this is another invisible foe, okay?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So
yeah, thank
the
you.
section which I'm going to read now is one of the adventures when they come across this particular ogre. Remember, he is not visible, except the tongue when it attacks. And it comes like a flash of lightning. You can just see it and then vanish, but you cannot tell where it is, where far away or near or whatever, okay?
Okay.
So here, the section which I'm going to read is a narration by one of the characters. When they return back, they are telling their father what they went through, okay? So this is one of the adventures they come to. So I'm calling this the ogre and the cure all here, or the saga of the invisible foe. And it's an extract from the forthcoming epic, The Perfect Nine, to be published in October this year. Yeah. So I'm going to read it in English only. I could not access the English, the equal one, so I'm reading it in English only for today. Okay. After a few days, okay, remember, it's one of the girls who is narrating the events now, okay? After a few days, we entered a forest so thick that we could not tell day from night. And it was fatigue that forced us to rest. We made fire, and as was our habit, we took turns for rest and guard duty. Some stayed awake as watchmen while the rest of us slept. Muiyuru is the name of the oldest of the girls, okay? Muiyuru interrupted our sleep. Human screams had awoken her. She had even seen, or thought she had, a big tongue snatched 3 of our guards. But she could not tell if it was a nightmare or not. So we stared at one another in terror, for indeed we could not see any of the 3 guards who had been snatched. We said we should wait until dawn to look for them. Then Muiyuru, one of the other girls, heard some steps heading towards us. Remember, it's very dark, okay? We struck the hard stones together as you taught us, and waited for the sound echo to help us locate the source of the steps, or even estimate the size of the thing that made them. But no echo came back. Suddenly, we heard a voice, loud as thunder. "This forest is Ogreland. Go back to where you came from." The thundering voice shook the forest, and yet we still could not tell the direction it came from. We pointed our spears and arrows in all directions. Muiyuru, the eldest girl, offered to talk to it, that thing that is. As it answered, we'd estimate its location. "Who are you? A bodiless voice? Are you a human, a bad spirit, or a good spirit?" "I am Ngũgĩ, king of ogres," the bodiless voice answered. We looked blindly around at each other in the dark. "Huh, the Ngũgĩ you, our parents, told us about, who had this hair, the one with the hair that could give power to Warigi's legs." Warigi is the youngest girl, the crippled one. How can we tell that you really are the Ngũgĩ?" Muiyuru asked. "Because right now, we can't even see you." "My body cannot be seen with human eyes," the ogre said. "It is impossible for you to know where I am. It is impossible for you to know where I am, whether far or near. My tongue is also my eye and mouth. It shines like lightning, and it creates a path of light in the dark. It lengthens like a chameleon's reaching out for a fly. It sees all, reaches all the corners of my forest. My hair cures all. Call it the cure-all. For there's no wound it cannot heal. Is that why you come to my forest? To steal my cure-all hair? Why do you want to end illness on earth?" Then Muiyuru answers back, "We have no wounds in the heart or body for you to cure," Muiyuru said. "Besides, we can cure ourselves. You are not the only know-it-all. You, the talkative dame, are the one I have always looked for," said Ngũgĩ the ogre. "Smooth-tongued Muiyuru, join me, and together we shall rule my forest kingdom." Muijuru's group, because we're in groups, shouted back in unison, "A greedy heart has no cure but a knife in the heart." Spears raised, some of them made as if to move, but Muiyuru restrained them, saying, "Let the head lead the heart. Hurry hardly ever gets things right." What they sought from this ogre called for a wily mind. She had not even finished when out came a wide red tongue. Remember, the tongue could be seen only when there's attacking, but you cannot see the body. Before we had recovered from the shock, the tongue caught 3 other men, tying them together and pulling the human bundle to its hiding place. At first, their cries to us and Muiyuru for help were loud. But the sounds kept on fading, and they suddenly came to an end. We knew, without seeing it, that the ogre had swallowed the men. Eerie silence fell upon the entire forest. Our hearts grew cold, and our bodies shook like reeds in the wind. But Muiyuru, the girl, says, "We don't have the luxury of trembling with terror," Muiyuru said, and quickly jumped and hid behind a tree at the same time, shouting to us to hide behind the nearest tree, but making sure to leave an imaginary space in the middle. We had to be ready with our bows and arrows and spears, so that when she called out, "Now!" we'd all attack the tongue. And whoever found an opportunity would pull out the hair in the middle of the tongue. After giving us sufficient time to hide behind trees, Muiyuru hurled the same insult her group had earlier shouted. "A greedy heart has no other cure but a spear in the heart." We who grew up with Muiyuru knew her heart was bleeding tears, but one could not tell this by her strong, arrogant, defiant tongue. The invisible ogre was very angry at the fearless Muiyuru. At once, it sent its tongue in her direction, but before it could ensnare her, she deftly moved aside. The long, wide tongue tied itself round the tree. "Now!" Muiyuru shouted. Our arrows pinned the tongue to the tree. And I should have explained that the ogre has one eye, which also goes on the tongue. And Muiyuru shot her spear at the eye at the tongue's end. And one of the men, Kehara, quickly jumped onto the tongue, which was as wide as a road, and walked about on it looking for the magical hair. He bounced up and down the elastic tongue. The ogre could not see him because its one eye had been pierced. But the moment Kehara pulled out the hair, Muiyuru the ogre let out a blood-curdling scream. His voice sounded like thunder, and a redness like lightning kept on flashing. Then Muiyuru roared again, and he pulled back his tongue with all his strength. He was able to free it, but it was torn into 9 straps. And now the ogre had no eye because it had been pierced. And they had got the hair, okay? Right.
Thank you very much.
Huh? Instead of that section, that's part of the larger epic, okay?
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor, for that wonderful and eloquent reading of the text. Yes, we have been able to follow very well, okay, and the audience has been very attentive.
Thank you.
We now want to say that this session is a question and answer session, which I have read the original in Gikuyu language.
Oh, wow.
And the question I would like to ask, the perfect 9 reminds me of facing Mount Kenya, where in a way there is a kind of retelling of the myth of origin of the Gikuyu people, as you remarked in your introductory, as you mentioned in your introductory remarks. So then the question is, how do you see the influence of the oral traditions of the Gikuyu community on your own writing? That is the first question.
No, it's very, very important that, because I grew up hearing stories by the fireside, literally. We did not have electricity, so we use fire as our lighting. And in the evening, as I have explained in my memoir, Dreams in a Time of War, we'd meet in one of my mother's houses. I had four mothers, as you know. So we'd meet in the elder mother's house and hear stories, okay? So storytelling is really integral part of my growing up, okay? Right, yeah. And oral traditions, or what we call orature is part of is a foundation of my literary imagination, yeah. And it's not only me. When you read all African writers who write in English or French, you'll find that there is a lot of recourse to oral traditions, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor.
And one more thing, the myth of the Gikuyu origins, Gikuyu and Mombi, is like our Adam and Eve, kind of, okay? And yes, every Gikuyu person of my generation would have heard versions of it, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. My version is an interpretation of the myth. I'm retelling it in my own way, okay? Yes. Because I'm fascinated, because I want to tell the story of Africa. So that's why the suitors come from all over the continent, okay? Okay. Yeah, and they pass through all the major rivers of Africa and others to come to Mount Kenya. And Mount Kenya, of course, is the second highest mountain in Africa, the first being Kilimanjaro and then Kenya, yeah? And Mount Kenya and Kilimanjaro the ancient Egyptians used to see them and they called them mountains of the moon, okay? Because they have ice or snow throughout the year. Okay. So that's why they were called mountains of the moon by the ancient Egyptians, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. A close question that has been asked by a member of the audience, Professor Clarissa Fieke from Germany, from the University of Bayreuth, is on the issue of translation. You have just mentioned that this version which you have just read is a translated version from the Kikuyu original. Now, Professor Clarissa Fieke would like to know, does the text which is translated change for you the moment it is translated, since the story itself is entrenched within what she is calling Gikuyu concepts? So I would want you to elaborate on that, the issue of translation. Professor.
Yeah. Translation, first of all, let me say, I believe in translations. I have described translations as the language of all languages. In other words, if languages spoke a common language, I would call it translation. So translation is very, very important in my advocacy of equality of languages, because all languages, big and small, can meet each other through translations, okay? Now, but there's a problem with translation. Let me put it this way. Every languages are like musical instruments. Each language has its own musicality. They can play the same melody, like say the piano can play the same melody as the guitar, but the musicality, the sound, can never be quite the same, okay? Although they can play the same melody, but the sound texture is very different. And in my advocacy of equality of languages, I argue this, you cannot say a piano, a piano is higher than a guitar, right? Each has its own musicality, but you don't put them in a hierarchy and say piano is higher or the guitar is lower or higher. I mean, they're inherently equal because each musicality is unique to that language. And there's no musicality of one language. We can be reproduced exactly in another language. I mean, you cannot, and I said you can play the same melody, but the musicality, yeah, it's the same thing with languages. So what is the problem in translation, quite frankly, whether I do it myself or somebody else, is how to translate that musicality, which is unique to Gikuyu, in terms of English. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor. I have received a question from Dr. Gil Bandishang. Gil Bandishang, still on translation, and Gil Bandishang would like to find out what is the experience, and maybe you could keep this brief because you have already mentioned.
Okay.
He's wondering what is your experience translating your own text, your own text, because he's wondering whether you are doing that to, is it that you care so much for the integrity of the text? That's what Gilbert Tishang would want you to mention. Briefly, very Professor Ngũgĩ.
First of all, I do my self-translation is very boring, first of all, okay? Because the excitement in writing is when you are creating something new, that's excitement. But now, when you're doing your own translation, it's like traveling the same journey all over again, okay? But without the excitement of discovery. So it's quite hard for me to do that. And I look forward to a time when there can be enough Gikuyu translators and others who can be doing that kind of, hopefully, who can be doing that kind of translation, because it's very difficult for, I would rather translate somebody else's work into Gikuyu. It's more fun for me, okay? So it's very difficult, I must say, but I tried my best. Gikuyu is a very, we use a lot of alliteration a lot. I wish I could read some sections, and it was difficult to get the same kind of alliteration in English,
Yes, I would like now to hand over to my colleague Yuan for the next set of questions. Over to you, Yuan. Alice.
Okay.
Alice?
Yes, thank you so much for this wonderful reading. And there is a question from YouTube from Rachel Baker, and she's asking, having the auger be embodied fully on the tongue, and the eye, the only visible part, the hair. Could you speak about this creative choice? Are you making connections to the language here as well? And I also want to ask from my own experience that your work has been translated into Chinese actually in the 1980s, but as the translator had two versions of your work, The Whip-Not Child, both in English and in Swahili. And then when there are some conflicts, he always go to the Swahili version because he thinks the Swahili version is closer to Kenyan context. But as we know that you wrote this novel in English, so how do you see this kind of language and translation in this part? Thank you.
Very quickly, when an African writer like myself write in English about African characters who speak African languages anyway, I am doing, even though I'm writing in English, I'm doing mental translation. So even though like Whip-Not Child, obviously was a mental translation, because when the character I have are Gikuyu language speakers. So when I hear, I could only hear them speaking in Gikuyu, not in English. And yet the conversation in the novel are in English. And that's why, by the way, that's why I came to reject. I could not continue doing that. That's why I stopped writing novels in English, and now I write them in Gikuyu and do my own translation. Although there are some other works which has been translated by Wangoi Wagoro, my other translator. Okay, yeah.
Yes, there is another question from Facebook by Jeffrey Dodd, and he is asking whose work you would like to translate into Kikuyu, if you have the chance.
Oh, many actually. I would like to do. I like to, quite frankly, I like to translate. Oh my God. I like to get all the world literature into Gikuyu language, right? Chinese literature, Japanese, Russian, English, and so on. But if I had to choose one, I like to translate the work of Garcia Marquez from Colombia, the one who writes in Spanish. I think it would go down very well in Gikuyu language. But quite frankly, I like to translate all the leading writers of every culture into Gikuyu language. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And also another question about your new book, like whether it will be available in audio, since you already told it in such an amazing way, and also for people who might have not have access to the published book, like or whether you have an audio book format of this one.
I'm told by my publisher that there is an audio version. I think there will be audio version of the epic here as well the written, the printed version. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Even by the way, even now you can read a little bit about it there are pictures of it in Amazon. You go to Amazon, you can see a little description of the Perfect Nine, the English version, and also the Gikuyu version is also available in Amazon as Kenda Muiyuru. Yeah.
Okay. And also another question by Professor Abdilatif Abdallah. When will the Kiswahili version of the Perfect Noun will be published?
Yes, I need to get I'll have to get my translator or my Swahili teacher. His name is Latif Abdallah. He is my Swahili teacher. Okay, so I can assure him that it will be translated into Kiswahili, but he will have to play a role as he does all the time in my works translated into Kiswahili. Yeah. Okay. So Latif Abdallah, I look forward to a translation of the epic into Kiswahili.
Yeah. Okay. And another question from Anna Chiara. Like, thank you for the storytelling, being our storyteller tonight. While listening to you, I saw the linkages with your earlier work, Matigali. Did Matigali influence the writing of this epic in any sort? And also, I think it connects with another question, whether this, how do the myths inform the present? And how, this is a question from Veronique Tadju, like what do we learn from them so we can face our challenges?
Yeah, first of all, let me say, when this pandemic came, I couldn't help but think of my epic because of the invisible foe, okay, who cannot be seen. And so when I go through this crisis we are going through right now, I'm thinking of my epic as well because of the concept of the invisible enemy. And sorry, can you repeat the question again, please?
One is about the link between Matigari and the Perfect Nine.
Oh yes, yeah. Matigari. Now, let me first say my first work in Gikuyu, my first novel in Gikuyu is called Shaitan Madarafaine, Devil on the Cross. Matigari, this character who was everywhere, was my second novel in Gikuyu. My third novel in Gikuyu is called, in English, Wizard of the Crow, or Shaitan Madarafaine. Yeah. Matigari was very important to me because I consciously used an oral narrative, or I exploited the structure of oral narratives to for my novel Matigari. Okay, right? Yeah. So Matigari is very, very important in this evolution, you know. But the epic, I didn't really have a. It's the first, for instance, this epic is the first epic in Gikuyu language for me. Okay, Kenda Muiyuru. So I had nothing from Gikuyu language to help me really. We didn't have a prototype of an epic, but I've read many other epics. Okay, I've read Homer, for instance, Iliad of Homer, Odyssey. I've read Indian epics, and I would recommend people to read Mahabharata. Really, it's an incredible work of imagination. Mahabharata and Ramayana. Okay, yeah. So I've read the epics from different peoples and so on, and also this helped me also in my conception of my epic. Yeah, Kenda Muiyuru. Yeah. And that's important for me. Let me just say this.
Okay.
When I advocate writing in African languages, or any language for that matter, it does not mean that you don't get inspired by other cultures. Okay? You can, you know, whether you're writing in Gikuyu or Kiswahili, you can also get inspiration from English writers, Russian writers, Chinese writers, you know, German writers, you know, I mean, yeah, the global culture is your culture, okay? And any language should be able to be inspired by what's available in other, we can share, in other words, without domination. Hierarchy, what's bad is hierarchy, seeing languages and cultures in terms of hierarchy. But if you see languages and cultures in terms of network of give and take, then all languages, big and small, have a lot to give to each other, okay? And they don't have to lose their musicality to do so, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. We have actually maybe 5 minutes, but I just want to read also questions from Rachel Baker, Lawrence Kibara from Kenya, and I would want you to, as a follow-up question, Baker would want to know why the choice of the tongue as the only visible part, you know, where the hair is located. And she's asking, are you making connections to language here, Professor Ngũgĩ? And make it brief, sir. Okay. We only have 5 minutes.
Yeah. That's a revelation. Tell her thank you very much. That's a revelation to me. I can see the possible connection. Yeah.
Okay.
But at the time I was unconscious of that as the language, but now I see. Yeah. That's a writing, by the way, or works of art. They can suggest more than the other had in mind. Yeah.
Okay. The other thing, of course, Lawrence Kibara is asking, when are you coming to launch the Kiswahili version in Kenya? And he's saying, we miss you here. And then, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'll be there. God willing.
Yeah. Perhaps I would want to, because I am being told by our timekeeper that our time is up. Maybe your closing remarks, Professor Ngũgĩ, in terms of the theme of our digital festival. We are talking about solidarity. We are talking about care. And what we wanted to ask you is, how do you think writers like yourself can help, society deal with, modern tragedies and crises like the one we have of COVID-19? So how do you see yourself, your role as a writer during such moments?
No, let me first say that this crisis has shown us, whether we like it or not, that the world is one. We have one planet. And we human beings are also part of nature. So far, the modern capitalism pursuing profit only has meant destruction of forests, destruction of nature. We act as if we as if nature depends on us. But it's not true. We are the one who depend on nature. Nature can do without the human, but the human cannot do without nature. So whenever we see water, rocks, soil, the earth, the rivers, the birds, and so on, we are dependent on that, and we should treat nature with more respect than we have been doing under the modern capitalism. But the other thing is, remember, we are one people on this planet. The planet is our common mother and father, right? So we should take care of it, and we should take care of one another, as well as take care of nature itself. Balance, give and take.
We have a question from our colleague, Diko Mohammed. He's asking, he read your Secure the Base in 2016, and going by the issues you are raising here, and what's your dream of Africa in the next 30 to 50 years?
Alexi, as I say in my book, Secure the Base, the problem with Africa, our problem in Africa is that Africa as a continent, which by the way is the biggest continent in the world, is bigger than all the other continents, okay, is the biggest number of resources. But for the last 500 years, Africa has been donating to the West, okay, especially. But Africa is portrayed as a beggar, and it's the other way around. It's Africa resources, African human bodies, Africans scattered all over the world, slavery, slave trade, slavery, colonialism. And even today, Africa resources go to build, say, the West generally, What I always see is an Africa united and in control of her resources, so that we make things with our resources and exchange with other nations on the basis of equal give and take, okay? But like just now, African resources are still largely controlled by Western corporations. And we have to change that, really. My dream is that the young people and even the new technologies will help us to, as in Africa, to really accept the Pan-African dream of Kwame Nkrumah and others, okay? And make Africa the independent, free base of all people of African origins, so that what happens to any African Black person in America or anywhere else is felt by every African person on the continent, and the other way around. Then we can connect with other peoples and other cultures on a basis of equal give and take. Just now, Africa gives all the time, then it is treated as a beggar. Our gold, our diamonds, our copper, our uranium even, used by others, but then we're treated as beggars. But to do this, Africa must accept their languages as a base. Whether small or big languages, we must root ourselves in our languages. Let me just end by this, what I keep on saying. If you know all the languages of the world and you don't know your mother tongue or the language of your culture, that is enslavement, okay? But if you know your mother tongue or the language of your culture, and then you add to it all the language of the world, that is empowerment. So, and what we want is empowerment, not enslavement. Yeah. And if you notice, African elite, well, African intellectuals, we do our own intellectual production, and we put all that knowledge, all that skills into English or French or Portuguese, What about 90% of our people who do not, in any case, ever read English or Portuguese? And so they are about 10%. And it were the carriers of knowledge from research, from everything else, but we end up putting it all, once again, it's locked up in English or European linguistic prisons. There is even one more thing I'd like to say. If you look in the area of literature, by what we get now in the world, what we call African literature in English and French, is not really African literature. I call it literally identity theft. Literary identity theft, LIT. Literary identity theft is when, like the case of Irish, who write in English, and that is called Irish literature. But what about Irish literature in Irish language, okay? When a literature which is written in another language can't replace the identity of the, can't assume the identity of the language it has replaced, I call that literally identity theft, right? And it's a terrible thing which happened to Africa. I wrote my novel With No Child in English. Imagine if I had written in Gikuyu or A Grain of Wheat, and what it have educated the younger generation, you know, a lot more. So I'm glad that eventually I didn't make a conscious break with English, but I keep on saying what would have been the case if All Things Fall Apart, all the other books written by Africans were originally available in African languages, and what we have as Things Fall Apart or With No Child are just translations of the original. What a world, different world it would be, yeah. It would have been.
Yeah. Thank you for this powerful reply. And we have maybe the last question from, I think both of them are asking about the same question. One is from Todd, and Dot is another one is from Adet Onukak. And they were asking about your writing of the mythology and orature, and how this will influence African literature and also the storytelling in the future.
Now, what we, as I said, I have two problems in the case of African literature, that although we have been, we draw from African orature, but we imprison that in English, okay? Now, what I'd like to see is really, there'll be much more, the world culture, global culture, will be rooted in the cultures of all the languages of the earth, you know. And by the way, of this, I'm not just talking about Africa alone. We have to, let me say this, we have to fight against hierarchy of cultures and languages, wherever it is, whether in China, whether in India, whether in Europe or wherever, Africa or wherever, you know, the concept that some languages are inherently of a higher order than others is nonsense. You know, all languages have musicality of their own, and there's no musicality which is higher than another musicality. What we have to find in the world is a way in which languages can talk to each other on basis of equal give and take, and translations can do a wonderful thing. Oh, and remember what I said, if you know your own language and add other languages, that's empowerment, okay? If I know Kikuyu and I also know English and Kiswahili and Spanish, that's empowerment. And that's what we really, I'm really calling for empowerment of cultures of all the people of the world through respect of the equality of languages of peoples of the world. Yeah.
I would want to pay him, pass regards from Professor Abdulatif Abdallah as well as Professor Wangui Wagoro, who are listening. And your Professor Wangui Wagoro, she doesn't want an answer, but she's just wondering, will your earlier works be translated into Gikuyu? Maybe that is a discussion for another day. I don't know what you want to say, Professor. A grain of wheat?
Yeah, I must say, by the way, let me just say publicly here that the question, Wangui Wagoro is the one who first came up with the concept of that when African people write in European languages, there is a text which has been lost because it's like they are translating into English anyway. So in the process, what she used to call the original text in a way is lost. So translation would then mean restoration. When you translate, say things fall apart, or we've not child into Kiswahili or into Gikuyu, you are doing a kind of restoration. It's a restoration, okay? Yeah. So she was the one who was very, very concerned a lot about the loss of African original text through people writing directly in English or French, So thank you very much.
Okay.
And Ablatif, of course, has been wonderful. Remember, Ablatif has been writing Kiswahili long before us, okay? So Ablatif has been very, very consistent, okay? And only now are we coming around to what he and others have been doing. Because you really remember that despite all these problems, there have always been writings in African languages. These writers may not be as well known as the others and so on, but really, I'm very grateful to all the writers who, at least before me, have written in African languages, and all those others, whether among the Hausa people or Yoruba people or whatever, who continue to write in African languages, despite all the difficulties that are mounted against our use of African languages,
I've liked the concept of enslavement and empowerment, which I think is one of my take-home messages, that if you know all languages of the world and you do not know your mother tongue, that is enslavement. But if you know your language and learn other languages, that is empowerment. That is my take-home message. So your closing remarks, Professor Ngũgĩ.
Well, first of all, let me say thank you very much. First of all, let me thank my helper, my grandson, Mingqing, who is here because he's the one, he works for Facebook and he's based in San Francisco. So I had to desperately call upon him this morning, please, Mingqing, whatever you're doing, help me make this connection. So he's been very patient. So Mingqing, I thank you very much. I also thank you very much for organizing this conference. Really, it's amazing that I can talk to some Ndogo in Kenya and talk to you others in Germany and Wangui Wagoro. I mean, it's very, very amazing while being in my living room, right?
Yes.
So I want to thank you very much for please continue this kind of conversation, because the challenges we are really getting is to make the world meaningfully one. Our world is one. We live on this planet. We don't as yet have any other planet. So the earth is our common mother and our common father. And all the languages we speak, are world languages. All the cultures we develop are world cultures, There's no culture which is inherently global and other inherently local, right? All languages have the same potentiality, and all languages can give to each other. So we are one world, one planet. We take care of it, and we take care of each other and reject all the lies, distortions, which have been brought about by modern capitalism.
Thank you very much once again.
Asante sana, mwalimu.
Asante.
we hope we can continue this kind of conversation in the future. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and have a good conversation. And you see what technology can make us talk to each other who in different parts of the world. Maybe a new world is coming to being. Okay, right? Yeah. Thank you.